Okay, we are live. Thank you everyone for joining us here tonight. My name is Rodney Hakim and I am the voice behind the New York Shakespeare social media feeds. And I thank you for joining us in this post-Father's Day special deep dive session. Yesterday was Father's Day. We wish all of you out there who are celebrating a very, very happy Father's Day. But we're here tonight to take that idea and throw it into the world of Shakespeare and say, there's a lot of fathers that appear in Shakespeare's plays and in Shakespeare's texts, and let's examine how they stack up. Are Shakespeare's fathers generally good fathers? Are they bad fathers? Are they absent fathers? Should the mothers have appeared more often? We'll ask these questions of our distinguished panel of guests. Let's start with our friend Erica Cantley. Erica is a writer, an educator, and the author of the memoir, Teaching Hamlet as My Father Died. Hello, Erica.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Erica, you and I just chatted on our Instagram live discussions earlier this year, and we spoke about how deeply moved I was by your book. I think it's a really, really excellent book, and you explore in it your journey in teaching Hamlet to your high school students as your father was in his final days. And subsequent to that, I also worked with you briefly. You had a Shakespeare's Birthday Bash event, of which I was very proud to be a part. And I think one of our other panelists here tonight was on that program as well.
Yes, Wendy joined us.
So Wendy, let's say hello to Wendy as well. Wendy Lennon of Shakespeare, Race and Pedagogy. Hello, Wendy.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's nice to join you all the way from England at 2 a.m. here.
Unbelievable. You're amazing.
Goodness gracious. I hope you had plenty of coffee to keep you awake for this discussion. Well, thank you. Wendy, why don't you give us a quick synopsis for those who might not be familiar of what Shakespeare, Race and Pedagogy is all about?
Yeah, thank you. So I launched the inaugural event in February this year. It was a week-long series of talks with academics, teachers and students, which was a fantastic experience. And I've been doing lots of work with schools and academics as well. To share my PhD research. I'm also a PhD student at the Shakespeare Institute in Stratford-upon-Avon, and I'm also an English teacher.
All right, so we have 2 English teachers thus far.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to our next panelist and also an educator, Dr. Bill Heller. Hello, Bill. Oh, are we frozen?
Hello.
I think.
Thanks for having me here.
I thought I think you were frozen for a second. Glad to have you back. And Bill, and you are the voice behind the website shakespeareteacher.com, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and you and I chatted before this event. We chatted about some of the many endeavors you've had relating to Shakespeare. You were the educator behind a series from our friends at Food of Love Productions. You ran the Speak the Speech series with them, is that right?
I did the Food for Thought series. Speak the Speech was my friend Julie Congress, who did more text work for actors. My lectures were more academically meant.
Okay, so why don't you fill us in on some of the things that you've been up to the last couple of years, Bill?
Okay, well, I guess just to bullet point it, I've taught graduate courses in Shakespeare at NYU. I taught for the Teaching Shakespeare Institute, which is sponsored by the Folger Shakespeare Library, which was here in New York at BAM. I worked on the companion website for the PBS series Shakespeare Uncovered, providing educational resources to go along with the miniseries. And I was what they called the Shakespeare expert on a celebrity cruise, which was Shakespeare themed.
Now that is something that I've been around Shakespeare for a long time, and I've seen a lot of fun Shakespeare projects, but a Shakespeare themed cruise is right up my alley, and I totally missed it. When and where did that cruise go?
Well, it left on April 23rd, 1616, which was meant to be the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death. So we wanted to celebrate Shakespeare's legacy, and it left from England and it went to Norway and Denmark. We stopped off at Shakespeare's Castle in Denmark, and we came back to Amsterdam.
I think we have to redirect the course of this discussion to finding out more about what this cruise was all about. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it's crazy. You study something like Shakespeare in school, you never expect you're going to get the phone call. We're having a Shakespeare emergency, you've got to fly out. But it was an experience of a lifetime. I wish I could do it again, but I don't know that they're going to have a lot more Shakespeare-themed cruises.
Cruises are a little bit in a difficult situation right now, so I don't know that'll be happening in the immediate future, but maybe the Zoom equivalent of such. Okay, let's introduce our final panelist for this evening, and that is Stephanie Cuniola. Hello, Stephanie.
Hello.
Stephanie is an educator as well, a writer and educator, and the voice behind the Protest Too Much podcast. Now, I just had the opportunity a couple of nights ago to record an episode with Stephanie. And for those who might not know the Protest Too Much podcast, it's a really, really fun podcast where Stephanie puts herself in a very difficult position. She asks each of her guests to take a position, let's say best father, as in tonight's discussion, best father, worst father, cruelest villain, or whatever the case might be, and take one side themselves and give Stephanie the opposite character to work with, and in most cases, she's given the most impossible character to argue for. I think you said that in one of your discussions, you were talking about the best mothers in Shakespeare, and you were asked to defend Tamara of the Goths as the best mother.
Yeah, I did not do so well on that.
And you're a teacher as well, Stephanie, yeah?
I am, yes, high school.
Okay, all right. So we have our panel of educators here tonight, and we are launching into our discussion of Shakespeare's fathers. So before we really get underway with some of the other things, I think, Erica, I want to kick it over to you. You have a very, very personal and deep connection with this subject in that you were teaching Hamlet to your high school students, and this was all happening as your father was in his final days, and you chronicled this all in your book so beautifully. So for you, given your deep background in this situation, how do you feel about the father relationships in Hamlet? Is it who is the primary father we're looking at there? Is it Claudius, the avuncular father substitute? Is it Hamlet's father, who is no longer there but appears in ghostly form? Who are we looking at here?
Well, of course, it's really funny because we see ourselves in the plays and in any art that we're observing. So I think it's impossible nowadays to look at the parent-child relationships from so long ago in Shakespeare's plays and really fully relate to them now, because it's just not the same. Parenthood and, the relationships between parents and child, they weren't intimate the way they are now. I think it'll very rarely, and certainly not royal parents, so I actually think it's kind of interesting to think the people who have suggested that really Yorick is the only real parental, figure of Hamlet in the way that we feel about fathers now. Okay. And not everyone does, by the way, of course, feel that way about fathers. People who are lucky enough to have an affectionate father figure in their life who they were close with. And fathers are always mysterious. I kind of feel like, maybe as I'm getting older, maybe all parents, maybe all humans are mysterious, but I do think that fathers have a mystique to them, maybe because classically they were out of the house more. They were the kind of last resort, wait till your father gets home. So we, from my generation being, very much middle-aged now and growing up in the 70s, I would say that classic father figure of maybe is a little distant, maybe is of an affectionate guy, but is still unknown. And so anyway, just to say that I can look at the relationship of between Hamlet and his father, but it's all in his head, you know, and it's really just grief, and I think there's confusion about, you know, of course, what's really going on. Is this really my dad? What does my dad really want me to do? But there's no evidence that he had any real rapport with his dad. Again, if you just take it on the face value, imagining a king, and how much time he spent with his son, and the fact that Hamlet was away. And so anyway, not to get off the subject, but they're all problematic fathers, and without a doubt, three of them, you know. So that's my thought. But what is fascinating to me is how the play pulls you in, and you see what you want to see, or you see where you are. I mean, I had taught that play for years before my father was dying. And as I've said, you know, many times, and we've talked about, all of a sudden I started seeing things more deeply. I started understanding grief. You know, my gorge rises at it, that his body in the cold, cold earth. All of a sudden, those lines would resonate more deeply. But I think a longing to have some relationship with your dad. He doesn't want to disappoint his dad. His dad says, look, if you don't do this, you're going to be, you know, so lame, like the guys out on Left Wharf or whatever, you know. So I think that he doesn't appeal to their warm relationship that they had before. It's more, you know, you have to do this. And so anyway, that's not really an answer, but that's what I think is interesting. I think that Shakespeare does an amazing job making us experience what it might be like to lose a parent. But again, I think he gives us the space to read into it where we are and what we need.
That's a common theme in the tragedies and the histories, the loss of the parent, the father figure primarily. In Hamlet, in King Lear, in so many of the plays, you have the almost the omnipowerful, the almost the one that it's like the from Mount Olympus almost, you know, the godly parent figure, the king or whatever kind of position he has. In most cases, the king, and all of a sudden he's in a position where he's either suddenly killed, or he's being deposed, or he's having his power taken away from him. And is that in some way, just that act of the king losing his status, is that something of a parallel between the relationship of the father and the son as the father gets older? The father that gets older, he starts to lose his abilities, he loses his powers, he loses his faculties, and suddenly it's the son has to step in and take over for the father. Bill, what would you say about that? I'm sorry?
From King Lear, he childed as I fathered.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So can we draw some kind of universality into the different groups of Shakespeare's plays? Let's say, for example, the major tragedies, Hamlet, King Lear, let's say Othello, Titus Andronicus. Is there something in there with the way that the father and son relationship manifests itself that is a repetition from play to play, or is each one a unique flavor that's dissimilar to the others? Stephanie, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're pretty dissimilar. If we look at Othello, it fits more with the comedies of, you know, a father who doesn't want his daughter to marry a certain person. With Lear, we're looking at fatherhood in a completely different light. With Hamlet, we're looking at the loss of the father by the time this play starts. Lear, we lose the father as the play goes. Romeo and Juliet, of course, is a little bit more in vein of Othello, but not quite the same, because it's not Capulet against Romeo. It's Capulet pushing someone different onto Juliet. So I think they all kind of have their unique flavor, and it gives us something different. Like Erica said, we can find ourselves in each of these plays, and the relationships that we have with our fathers or father figures, we can kind of adopt them to, hopefully not in the tragedy vein of father figures, but we can kind of see different elements of ourselves in these different plays. I think the tragedies do a really good job of differentiating father figures.
It seems
I
to me,
agree.
go ahead, Bill.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Bill.
I think that one common thread that we see, as Stephanie said, in Othello and in some of the comedies, so we got Brabantio, Baptista, Aegeus. I think a common thread is they think they're being good fathers. Leonardo, right? They think they're doing what they're supposed to be doing as fathers, looking out for their daughters or whomever, and they never stop and say, wait a minute, am I the bad guy?
Right.
But they are the source of the conflict in some cases. And they're putting pressure on their child, and the child has agency and wants to do what she wants to do. And that's, in many cases, the conflict. So I think, I agree with Stephanie that Shakespeare paints a panoply of different characters and different fathers. But that is one theme that I see, is that they think they're good fathers. They think they're doing the right thing. And their society backs them up for the most part.
In each of these cases, whether it is Hamlet and Hamlet's father and the drama with the uncle, with Claudius, whether it is Lear with he wanting to divide his kingdom, with or even in Romeo and Juliet, you're talking about the father wanting to marry off the daughter. In Othello, with Brabantio wanting to assure the healthy marriage of his daughter. In each of these cases, there's something about succession. There's something about not just the kingship being passed into the proper hands, but it's also ensuring that the next generation is embracing the challenges of taking over their spot in the right way. In Othello, for example, I think there's a big divide in that Brabantio he has already married off his daughter to Desdemona, to Othello, to the mighty military general. But then we're drawn into the beginning of the play, and it's immediately we're immersed into this world of the racial bias and the antagonism. Go ahead, Bill.
Sorry, when you say he's married her off, you don't mean that he actively supported that?
No, he did not. That's a very good catch. That's a very good thing you caught there. That's part of it, is that he doesn't have the agency. Desdemona marries of her own volition, and that is something that is very atypical in that era, and in violation of the father's command. The father has the right to decide who his children marry, to who will be the successor, and we don't know of any other heirs to the throne to the dukedom to Brabantio aside from Desdemona. She's an only child, right?
I think. Sorry, Bill.
Go ahead, Wendy.
I think that's one of my favourite parts of looking at fathers and their children in Shakespeare's plays, is actually how the children respond to their fathers, and especially the kind of bad fathers. In Othello, where Desdemona, she actually performs the kind of ceremony herself, and the fact that she's speaking in court and stands up to her father and makes that decision, taking away the father's role in many ways. I find that fascinating. And I also think about that conflict and think about the context, which links to something that Erica mentioned about that kind of silence of the father in a way, in that they that kind of masculine role that they have to take on to be like, the father figure, the man of the house, the king, whatever you'd like to call it. But then how there feels like there's this tension that Shakespeare explores, which I think is a common thread, the only common thread, because I agree with Stephanie that they are so different and the relationships are so different. But one of the common threads seems to be how Shakespeare explores that tension between stopping that neat kind of succession and not wanting that to happen in some ways. And I enjoy that tension, to be honest with you, and I love those moments where we see the daughters standing up to their fathers and Desdemona making that decision for herself, which I think is brave. And I think even though Erica is absolutely right, they are so different to the relationships that we would have with parents now. That's something that I think, as I teach my A-level students, Othello, that's something that they can connect to, making those choices for themselves. And you know, in Juliet as well, wanting to make that decision for herself and taking away the father's role, which feels subversive and also quite empowering at the same time. So yeah.
Can we say that, and I posed this question to you all before this discussion, is that I have an idea that there's a similarity in these figures where they are the monarch, they are the all-powerful figure, but the road to succession is littered with disloyal people. Whether it is Hamlet Sr. with a disloyal brother, and then he has to have another family member come avenge him for this disruption of the royal line. Hamlet has to be the avenger. In let's say in King Lear, the succession should be to the daughters, but there's a disloyalty. The daughters take upon themselves, they take the agency again away from the father in deciding where it goes. And then Cordelia has to be the avenger. The honest daughter has to be the avenger against the disloyal, the dishonest daughters. And the same goes through. So is this motif of the disloyal figure that disrupts the line of heredity? We can also see this in the histories. We can see this in pretty much any of the histories with Richard, with any of them, where there's the war for which side the crown is going to go to, whether it's the white rose or the red rose, you know, which side is going to take the crown. But it seems like there's always this tension of, is the crown going to go where the current owner, intends it to go? And who's going to be the one that steals the ball along the way and you know, goes the other direction? Who are the Avengers? Who are the ones? Are the Avengers the one who really should be the ones who have the throne at the end? You know, Hamlet is the Avenger in Hamlet. He's the son who avenges the father because the disloyal brother comes and takes over. And Hamlet is intended to become the next in line. Is Hamlet really the one who should be king here? Or should we go according to who would be the most effective king? In some ways, Claudius is a more effective king and a better fit for the throne than either Hamlet Sr. or Hamlet Jr.
In some ways, I'd like to challenge the idea about disloyalty, because I feel that King Lear is probably one of my favorite plays. And isn't he being disloyal to his daughters by posing the question? So yes, there are disloyal characters, but I think him as a father, to pose that question and to divide his kingdom depending upon their answer, is disloyal in his role and his duty.
What do you see in that situation as what should have been his proper course of action, Wendy?
To care for his daughters and ensure that they are that they are well and they're in a position to take on the role when the time comes, not to just say, how amazing do you think I am? It's so wrong.
Which one of you loves me the most?
So I think the way that the way that his daughters react to that, he brings that upon himself, and that's his own disloyalty that destroys that succession.
So can we say it's the hubris, or in some ways the foolishness or the misguidedness of the current king, the father figure, the father who loved not well, but too loved not wisely, but too well, as Othello said. Not that he's the father in that situation, but to borrow his phrasing. So maybe there. Go ahead, Erica.
I want to say something. It's a little bit slightly off, but with this idea of rupture and disloyalty, one of the things, it's kind of a stretch, but I was thinking about how maybe in some cases, if you look at first of all, Stephanie had mentioned that the Brabantio dynamic lines up more with the comedies because it's kind of you didn't say this part, but part of it is that, the kids are getting one over on the dads. And so that usually is more the comic structure. And when the parents are the ones who are oppressive and controlling, it becomes tragedy, like in Hamlet. But what I thought was interesting, based on some of the questions you asked us to consider ahead of time, Rodney, is that what about if you take fathers and daughters, and even though, yes, it's has to happen for succession for daughters to marry, is perhaps daughters marrying, one of the core ruptures of family, and in a way disloyalty to the dad. And if you think of Shakespeare as the father of two daughters, I don't know, just something to think about.
Well, absolutely, that makes a lot of sense, because even in the milieu, which in the context which in Shakespeare is writing, he's writing for Queen Elizabeth for the majority of his career, and that's a perfect case where it is a father who has no successor but his daughter. Henry VIII has passed on the crown to Elizabeth I, and in many ways, much of Shakespeare's writing is an indirect celebration of the power of the female monarch, the potential of a female monarch. So and it's also where his bread was buttered in some ways. So it was prudent for him to make sure to keep the queen happy with what he wrote. But absolutely, I think there's not a limitation, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no limitation that the only possible choice for a good successor is a male successor. Of course, that's preferred. That's where you have more security in how the throne is going to pass from one generation to the next. But I don't think it's necessarily predicated that a male heir, a male successor, is going to be a better choice than a female one.
Well, and I wanted to, sorry. I just wanted to throw out quickly, it's not a tragedy, but when you talk about disloyalty, I just directed an online Winter's Tale, and looking at Leontes, and I'd always read the Winter's Tale as his anger came from Hermione's disloyalty. But the more we talked about it in rehearsals, the more we played with it, his anger comes from succession, like you're talking about. His anger comes from the fact that this is not his child, because that's what he's so fixated on. He could not care any less about Hermione or what she's done, but it's the baby that is the full kind of focus for him. He already has a son, but that's where all of his anger kind of accumulates. And I just thought it was a really interesting way to kind of re-look at that play and the idea of disloyalty and succession and how important that is.
And he does question whether the son is really his too.
Right, exactly.
I think you're right. I think that's a big part of why he's distressed.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, I do believe Henry VIII did have a male heir. Edward VI, and then he died, and his sister Mary became queen, and then Mary died, and Elizabeth became queen.
Okay, all right. So, but by the time Shakespeare is writing, that has all already transpired.
Yeah,
Elizabeth is already firmly on the throne. And by the end of his career, by the later stages of his career, he's essentially writing for the court of Elizabeth, and then subsequent to that, for the court of King James I. So there is a strong necessity for Shakespeare to write in a way that is not a condemnation of, in the larger sense, the powers that be around him. Even if you look into the history, not to digress too far from the subject matter, but the when he wrote Macbeth, there's a very clear connection with the gunpowder plot and everything else, that he's writing a facsimile or a avatar of James I into that play, and basically he's writing for the powers that be. But but that's a discussion for another day. But getting back to our discussion here, so we have.
Sorry, can I say one more thing about the disloyalty and rupture concept? Is that if you look at Lear, the two daughters who are married are the ones who are disloyal, and the one who hasn't gotten married yet is the one who's still, loyal to the dad. So I think that's interesting.
Okay. No.
Well, even after she becomes married, right? She gets married to the King of France, but she's still the one fixed by him. And it feels like Lear wants to test their loyalty, and it's a bad test. Right? To put it mildly, it's a bad test.
Absolutely.
Just tell me how much you love me, and they're like, "All right, here you go."
Well, isn't that also in some ways, since we're on the subject of the daughters having to be the ones who will carry the lineage forward, and since they're going to be in most cases marrying the regent, the monarch, the dignitary of another land, of France, of Norway, of wherever, there is the strong possibility that the king's his whole country, everything that he's assembled during his tenure as king is going to be eaten into or subsumed by the other country to whom the daughter is marrying. So there needs to be, just in the pragmatic sense, some level of control of maintaining England as the one that subsumes the other, or at least maintains parity with the other one. Would you say no? Anyone? Okay, all right. Let's take this idea of the daughters and the avengers and the avenging children. Again, we have Hamlet as the avenger. We have Cordelia as the avenger. In one case, in Titus Andronicus, the father has to be the avenger himself because the children are the ones that are preyed upon. So what happens in those cases?
Young Clifford.
I'm sorry?
Young Clifford.
Right. So in these situations, what do we do when the father's children are the ones who are attacked, are disabled, are rendered incapable or whatever, and the father has to, in his old age, become the one to avenge and the one to maintain his grip on control of his kingdom? That makes for a tough Father's Day to have to do that, no? I'm thinking specifically of Titus Andronicus, with Titus having to fend off Tamara of the Goths and all of her machinations and to avenge all the atrocities that befall his daughter, Lavinia. But it could apply equally well to Lear in some sense. You have the avenging daughter who, in some ways, Lear has to avenge what happens to her, and to all of his loyal subjects. So at what point does the story change from succession into a battle for survival? It's in some ways when the children or whoever the other assistants are in the protagonist's journey to get the crown to the next generation, when they fail in their attempts to save him. How far can the king go to save himself? How hard does dad have to work to keep the crown on his head? Any thoughts, anyone? Wendy, let's kick it over to you. Any thoughts about this idea of the children and how the lineage is secured when the threat from the antagonist is too great?
I think it also poses the question of the problem of having the father, a single person, kind of in control, because you mentioned Macbeth, and I immediately thought of that when you mentioned it earlier with the fears around succession. And I think that's the problem when there's just this one figure that's in charge of everything, as opposed to, say, a group or a couple of people. I think that's where a lot of the problems are. It feels it's great to watch because of that tension, but it also creates so much instability because there's just this single person. I do think that there's because it perhaps contextually it's not where we are now with daughters, women being socially accepted as being able to lead necessarily. And looking at Queen Elizabeth, that was something that, you know, I wonder if some of these daughters spoke to that kind of female sort of power, really, in being able to lead and control. But it seems like it's not really, they're not really as trustworthy. And as you said, that it seems that there is this, you know, male heir is the one that should be there. And I think that that's for a modern audience and modern readers, perhaps that's something that we kind of connect to and want to question and challenge. Cordelia being a daughter that kind of avenges her father and showing that kind of loyalty, as it were, to her father. But I think it's still kind of measured, you know, she will give, this is how much she will give to her father, and this is how much she will give to her husband. And that reminds me of Desdemona, you know, she takes on that role of making that marriage herself and that transfer to her husband, but she knows the proper position, really, of this is my, you know, this is how I've respected you and as my father, and now I'm handing this over to my husband. So I think it's challenging those kind of roles and that kind of leadership.
You mentioned right at the top of what you were saying there, Wendy, something really that connects deeply into our discussion, and that is that the king figure in most cases is alone. There's no spouse, there's no mother figure to go along with the father figure. What can we attribute this to? Why are there so few mother figures, and why are there so many single dads in Shakespeare? Anybody, any thoughts?
Yeah, I have kind of a really basic thought, and I think that a lot of it is he needed parent figure and had men to act them, you know, and that's not to say that there weren't women in the plays, because obviously we have female characters through the plays, but I think we need a parent, and just having a dad is going to be easier from a practical playmaking standpoint for him. And he has the actor to do it, and they're ready to go. And that's, you know, that might not be a very academic or thoughtful answer, but I think it probably played into it a little bit in some cases.
And a mother might intervene on the child's behalf.
Lady Capulet was not great, really, at intervening.
That's kind.
I don't think that's, I think, yeah, she's not a great mother, really. And the nurse's kind of interventions, even to a point, was, you know, kind of supporting Juliet, but then that moment where even the nurse abandoned Juliet and Juliet was very much alone. So yeah, I think that the father's I don't know if it's just as a practical thing. I think that's a really interesting possibility, that practically not having mothers, but I do think that I wonder, as I said with Lady Capulet, if we don't have the mothers there, how much of a role could they actually play? Because Lady Capulet almost kind of knew her place and knew the role that she had to play. Even Desdemona knew, even though she made the choice for herself, she, you know, gave over her power in a way to her husband. So even if we do have mothers, I wonder, because of the structure and because of that patriarchal power, how much of an influence would they have actually had over their daughters?
Well, and so I think it's really interesting because Much Ado has a ghost mother. Imogen is written in as Hero's mother. And through the play, we see places that Maybe Antonio's lines could have been more motherly lines towards Hero. And then we see places where Beatrice at the wedding is the one who is fighting for Hero and maybe taking that place of a mother figure. So we see this character made obsolete by the other characters in the play. And I think it's really fascinating because it shows that Shakespeare was like, maybe she should have a mom. And then kind of throughout writing, it was like, nah, she doesn't need a mom. She's got everyone else.
But it's interesting that you mentioned Beatrice, though, because early on in the play, she's very much, taking on more of a masculine role in some ways, in that she doesn't want to get married. She's just that single person on her own as well until later on. So she's taking, maybe when she decides to fall in love, she decides that marriage is in her future, that's when she starts mothering Hero almost more than before, or defending her as a mother would. I think that's a super cool connection to make.
Yeah, and then she says, if I were a man, I could do this. That great speech. Also, while we're on Much Ado, and back to what you were asking about avenging fathers, Leonardo is in this play, of course, going to avenge Hero's, murder, social murder. And so that's kind of interesting that he's cast in that role of doing that.
So if we're talking about mothers, the one place that I can think of, maybe there's something that's eluding me, but the one situation I can think of where we have a very clear mother figure who in some ways is a very dominant mother figure is in Coriolanus. In Coriolanus, we have Volumnia, who is in some ways more effective than some of the fathers, or at least more dominant in her role with her son. She has that very, very domineering personality, and in that context, it seems like that the mother figure there, although there's no father figure stated there, the mother figure exists more to prod on her son to greatness than to allow him to be pulled back by the more defensive, more timid daughter-in-law. So is the absence of the father there replaced by, basically, is it, whether it's the mother or the father, is the correct position, or is it the preferred position that's being posited by Shakespeare, that the way to get your heir, your son, your whomever, to succeed in the kingship is to have that domineering personality, whether it's the male or a female? Let's rephrase the question. Who are the best fathers in Shakespeare? And Stephanie, you've debated this, the best and worst fathers and mothers on your podcast. Who in your back and forth, who do you feel are the best fathers in Shakespeare?
The shepherd from The Winter's Tale. No joke, no lie, he's not a good person, but Aaron from Titus gives up his entire life for his baby. And that's, I think, all, a lot of what we can ask from a father. And then I have a list of caveats, but oh gosh, I just lost it. Who's my third? I don't know. Come back to me. But the shepherd, I think, from The Winter's Tale is one of the best dads in the entire canon, because he's just a good guy.
Okay, so let's go, while you're bringing that train of thought back, let's go to the other ones. Who are the best or who are the worst? Let's go in either extreme. Who are the worst? Who's the worst?
The worst.
Okay.
He's not getting a lot of Father's Day cards.
Which one?
Leontes from Winter's Tale.
Oh, Leontes. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Okay, Leontes. Yeah, he's no prize. He's
the guy that sent his daughter out to be left out to die.
I think, yeah, he's really the ultimate depiction in Shakespeare of the jealous father whose jealousy is so overwhelming that it destroys everything he's constructed.
I was thinking you were looking for mothers in Shakespeare,
and
Richard III has 3 mothers, right?
That's a very good.
There's mother, the Duchess of York, and there's also Queen Margaret. Say what you will about Queen Margaret, but in Henry VI, Part 3, she really goes to bat for her kid, right? And then you've got Queen Elizabeth from Richard III, who's got two older sons that she wants to protect, two younger sons that she, I suppose, wants to avenge, and then a daughter that she's also trying to protect from Richard.
Okay.
So if you're looking for how Shakespeare does motherhood, there's a lot of models in that play.
Yeah, I think we get a little bit more deep into those relationships in the histories. Go ahead, Wendy.
I was just going to say, what about Hamlet's mother?
Gertrude, yeah. So what do we think about Gertrude? Let's jump into it. What we talked about in the early part of this discussion about Claudius and Hamlet Sr. Let's talk about Gertrude. How do we feel about Gertrude as a mother? Is she depicted in a positive way? Is she depicted in a negative way? Are we to think that she has dishonored her husband by marrying Claudius, or has she done the politically correct thing or the politically pragmatic thing?
I mean, I think a lot of it, of course, is how she's played in whatever interpretation, and that's very much a director choice. But I think if we look at it historically, the amount of agency or choice that she had to protect her own future and to protect her son and his ascent to the throne, I think that there's a lot that isn't in her power. And I sympathize a lot with Gertrude. And I choose to, err on the side that this is kind of her one avenue and she doesn't know that Claudia killed her husband. I choose to lean towards that belief because I think there's a lot of power taken away from her when King Hamlet dies and an opportunity presents itself and she takes it. And I think that it's hard to judge that as a motherly action versus just the action of a woman in that time who had very few options.
Wow, I've always been really, I haven't read it in that way. I've always been really shocked and annoyed with her. Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. I don't think I agree, but I haven't.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Let's hear why you disagree.
Because very much like Erica, I read Hamlet after my father had died, and so that's really significant moment of the most important part of the play had happened like before the play had started, and something that I was kind of considering and going through as well had happened before the beginning of the play. And so I always see it from Hamlet's point of view, and just the considering the possibility of like a mother marrying in that way. And I completely take your point, Stephanie, that as in a role, in societal roles and that hierarchy and what she needs to do, and kind of, I suppose, protection of him in a way, but I didn't read it like that. I was always really frustrated with her and considered how Hamlet would be feeling in that situation. But I'd love to hear Erica's thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think
I think you have a complicated relationship with Gertrude, right?
Well, I still go back to most of the thinking that I've done about the parents has been, I see them as detached, rich, royal parents who let a nanny raise their kids. So I don't see a lot of connection between Gertrude and Hamlet emotionally there. So then, in classes, I've discussed what Stephanie said, the things about, what were her options, and, was that gross and disgusting or wasn't it? And, it's certainly possible that they had an affair before, did Claudius go on all the family vacations, whatever. But I have to say that yeah, I've never, 100%, it's how it's played, and that's what's fascinating, is to see what kind of a person Gertrude shows up as this time, and you can make her more, bonded and affectionate. But yeah.
Bill, did you have something that you wanted to?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of room for interpretation here. Like Stephanie said, it's a directorial choice, or maybe a choice for the actor, or in Wendy's case, a choice for the reader, that you interpreted how you see it or how you want to see it. But she like you said, we don't know how much does she know about what's really happened. Maybe she's in on it too. Maybe they were already having an affair before Claudius made his move. They did get married awfully quickly. And maybe none of that's true, and she's just doing the best she can. But
I think it was kind of stupid of her to say, "Thou wilt not murder me." Dumb.
All right, let's kick into a different section of Shakespeare. Let's go into the comedies, and specifically the one that I'm thinking of right now. It's kind of similar to what we've been talking about thus far, but it's in a little bit of a different vein. It's Taming of the Shrew, which I'm sure in Shakespeare's day was a laugh riot, but nowadays is very problematic, largely because of the way in which the father deals with his daughters. So we have the father, who we kind of spoke about the idea of the succession and finding the right partner for the daughter, but we're not talking about royalty so much here as we're talking about riches. We're talking about him trying to find the wealthiest. Bancho trying no, not Bancho. What's the father's name in Taming of the Shrew?
Baptista.
Baptista, trying to find in largely the wealthiest suitor for his daughter, which was not uncommon in those days for a wealthy or aristocratic family. And it's in many ways that Catherine is appalled by the proceedings and essentially says that, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to marry me or sell me off? So we have that. We also have a repetition of that with oh goodness, it is Portia, right? Right, where the different people, they bring in the pot of gold and the pot of, and she also has the same idea. Am I being sold, or am I being found a suitor for? So we have these situations in which the father is attempting to marry off the daughter, and I get the sense that in the comedies, yes, you have the same dynamic of the succession of the father trying to find the next generation's correct path. But it's almost kind of like what you have in sitcoms today, where the father is kind of buffoonish and out of touch, and the kids seem like the ones who are a little bit more in touch with the idea of what the audience would perceive as the correct way forward. What do you think?
It seems to me that in both Merchant of Venice and The Taming of the Shrew, the fathers are already wealthy, and it's the suitors that are looking for the payday, right? I think Petruchia says, "I come to wive it worthily in Padua."
Right.
If worthily, then happily in Padua. And it seems to me that Portia's father doesn't care about the money. He wants to find the best man, someone who's not all about money for his love.
Right.
Someone who's going to choose the lead gasket when given Hazard all he has.
And that might be the disparity between Merchant of Venice and Taming of the Shrew, whereas Baptista and Shrew is a little bit more money oriented. It seems like, as you're saying, in Merchant of Venice, we have the opposite, where the idea is to find the one who really does love his daughter.
And yeah, I'll piggyback off Bill, and I'm going to bring Merry Wives into it, because that's my third favorite father, is Master Page. He falls into this very common trap of trying to marry his daughter off to the richest person, but then when his daughter takes control, he's like, all right, cool, I guess it is what it is, which is exactly what he should do. But when you talk about that, we talk about status versus money, because Paige has money, but he's looking for status to accompany that for his daughter. And Sweet Fenton has kind of neither anymore. You know, he hung out with Hal, but doesn't really have any money, doesn't really have any status of his own. And he's like the least viable option in their eyes. So kind of looking at the balance between money and status, I think, is a really interesting factor to play into it as well.
As you've been speaking, something that I've been kind of questioning and considering is that the fathers in their current position, the current generation, feel that they know and should decide who succeeds them. But actually, this also raises the question of they don't necessarily know what the next generation will need and what is best for them. So why should they decide, actually? You know, I can't help but still think about the last year that we've had, and who knew? And so we don't know what the next generation or the type of leader that is going to be needed to fulfill that role. So it shouldn't necessarily be that decision of that father, that king, especially when the father, so the Merchant of Venice, and the father has, you know, like Hamlet, the father has kind of died before the play, and then it's left up to the children to kind of make that decision and take the action. So yeah, should the current fathers, kings, be the right ones to decide? I don't think so.
Especially since Portia's father's already dead.
Yeah, exactly.
And it called from beyond the grave.
Exactly. And that control as well, that continued power to make that decision even when he is dead. It's very, arrogant.
Or in Hamlet's case, comes back from the dead.
Yes, to continue that control. Wow.
All right, we are just coming up on the end of our hour. Panelists, do we have any final thoughts we want to throw out there before we bring this discussion to a close?
I think King Lear is still one of the most striking plays for me, with probably one of the worst, terrible father. But I have absolutely loved our discussion. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun. So, go ahead, Bill.
I was just saying, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for having us.
Great. All right, thank you all for joining us here tonight. Those who are watching on Facebook, we will be also rebroadcasting this discussion on the New York Shakespeare YouTube page and on our Instagram channel. So you can find the full discussion there. It will also stay right here on our Facebook group, and you can watch this again after our recording is completed. Let me thank our wonderful panelists for joining us here tonight. I'm going to start with Wendy because she is joining us all the way from the UK, and I think it's about 2:58 a.m. there right now. Yes. So Wendy Lennon of Shakespeare, Race, and Pedagogy, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people check out all the stuff that you're up to, Wendy?
My website, shakeracepedagogy.com. I'm also on Twitter @WriterLennon and on Instagram as well. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Erica. Where can people find you and your wonderful book?
My book is on Amazon, and I'm on Instagram mostly, or Facebook.
Okay, and that is Teaching Hamlet as My Father Died. Highly recommended. It's a wonderful book. Excellent read.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. And nice to meet Stephanie and Bill. I hope I see more of you.
Nice to meet you all.
Okay, Bill, where can people find you and all the things you're up to?
People can find me at shakespeareteacher.com. It started out as a blog, but I've kind of been neglecting the blog for the past year. And even when I wasn't, it was mostly like riddles and anagrams and stuff like that. There are 2 sections of the website I'm very proud of. Not that I'm not proud of the riddles and the anagrams, but there's a section for people who want to have Shakespeare readings. And it's a resource page. You could have your readings in someone's home, or you could go to a restaurant, or you could do it through Zoom. And it kind of gives you a lot of resources that make it easier to do. And then the other thing is I put together family trees for Shakespeare's history plays.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
that must be a very intertwining tree.
Yeah, well, I had some logistical issues with the intertwining, but it's useful if you want to kind of make sense of who's who in the plays. You get a family tree. Each play has its own family tree. You can see who's in the play, who's alive, who's dead, what names the characters might be called in the play, and of course how they're related to each other.
Excellent.
And
And
there's
that's
primogeniture, so you can kind of get a sense of why it matters.
Thank you.
and that's www.shakespeareteacher.com. Okay, Stephanie, where can people find you and your wonderful podcast?
It is called Protest Too Much, and it is anywhere you get podcasts. You can find us on Twitter at P2M or Facebook at P2M And yeah, come vote for our arguments. It's pretty fun.
All right. Well, I thank you all for joining us here tonight. Again, my name is Rodney Hakim, and I thank you for checking this out. You can find all of our content, including this discussion and many other projects that we have had in the past. All of our archives are here on Facebook, on our Instagram channel, and on our YouTube page, and all over the place on social media. Just look up New York Shakespeare. Thank you all. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers.
Thank you.
To our wonderful
Thanks for
panelists.
having us. That was really
Thank
fun.
you. And
Bye.
we wish you all a good night.
Good night.
Bye. Thank
Happy
you.
Father's Day.